So the 4 pillars of self-mastery, these are the 4 pillars. It's unshakable confidence is your outcome. If you're not interested in transformation, if you're not interested in becoming and showing up as the best version of yourself consistently, this may not resonate with you. My best client is the person who feels like they've tried everything. And then they're willing to try some things that they never tried before. And neuroplasticity, it doesn't take me long. That's why I do the uhs and the ums exercise, because it doesn't take long to show people that there's a new way of changing habits that they're not aware of. So you have the 4 pillars here, the fundamentals. These are fundamentals and levers. These are the tools that we have to set the stage for our 30,000 stimulus reaction cycles we have a day. You see, I have behind me the 7-step reset. 7-step reset is my framework to work through those 30,000 cycles per day so that we're in control. We have agency as opposed to being at the effect. We're at the cause. The next one is habit mastery. I go to habit mastery second, even though you can't really master habits until you master state, but you can make some pretty significant gains. And I needed to have people understand that we can change habits. Like I said, for years, emotional intelligence told us that you can't change. The habits can't change. People believe that. I believed it for a while. Now neuroplasticity shows us how to do it, but no one sent out the memo. So people still are walking around believing what they learned from emotional intelligence, that you can't change. I'm here to tell you that you can. I'm going to show you how to do it. I'll give you an example, and I'll explain to you why it doesn't work when people don't do certain things, what those certain things are, and also why it seems so hard. But when you understand it and then reverse engineer, it's not difficult. It's scary sometimes because people have been running away from things for their whole life, thinking that they have something wrong with them or that they're not capable of doing something, imposter syndrome, whatever it was. They are fearful about stepping into that space. So it's kind of scary, but we have to do that. But it doesn't require special courage. It doesn't require having beliefs. It does require letting go of limiting beliefs, but let's jump in. The third one is state mastery, because in order for you to build a path of least resistance, you have to have a period of time where you're not continually going into fight or flight. You have to, for that new stage to take place. It doesn't mean that it's going to take 3 or 4 years. It just means that those paths of least resistance, that the old ones, they can be reignited if they're deep enough and strong enough. And so you have to be leaning into this new way of doing things for a period of time. The actual habits can change in a week. You'll see results in a week. And for most people, I would say that you're going to have the breakthroughs in 3 to 6 months. But what I'm talking about is you have people who have been consistently triggered, and those pathways are still available if they choose to go down a path where they're triggering those things again. But there's ways that you can stop that. We have to understand that it's just like a dog. If you've trained a dog, I use a dog as an example because people have seen it. If you train the dog to sit, roll over and all that, and you don't do anything with it for months and months and months, or the dog goes and lives with some other people for a while and comes back, you have to start over again, it feels like. But it's not really starting over, right? Because they learn a lot faster the second time. But if you don't keep reinforcing it, the dog goes back to the old way. So what does reinforcing it look like with state mastery? Just every day you get up and you keep moving one foot in front of the other. Just keep one foot in front of the other. Keep moving towards your quest. As long as you're moving towards your quest, you're actually reinforcing the new pathway. And then we have performance hygiene. This is an important one. The reason this is on there is I saw too many people who have a strong awareness of what to do and how to do it. They make the shifts, but they have things that throw them back off course. And one of the big ones is forgiveness. And it's not forgiveness from a morality standpoint. It's forgiveness from a personal wound standpoint. Now, this is not mental health. I don't do any mental health. It's like little T. Something happened when they were a kid. Someone knocked the ice cream cone out of their hand and people started laughing. And this becomes this pain. It's a personal pain. Who knows what things became little T's, right? And that little T comes back up again, and they're feeling some kind of way with the person that they're with. The person they're with didn't do anything, but maybe did something to remind them of that time. And there you go. That reminder creates the anxiety that happened from the little t, and now it's impacting their current relationship. So that's why I put the performance hygiene, but there's also some other things in there. Consider that we have 100 billion neurons, and those 100 billion neurons are physiological or neurobiological. And hydration, nutrition, the health of your blood, your oxygenation, all those things matter. We know that they matter from a physical standpoint, but they also matter from a cognitive processing standpoint. Oftentimes people, and my clientele is over 50, my target. Oftentimes people will think that something is not available to them, and then they take it off their radar and stop even thinking about it. As a result, they'll think that this is not for them, or that's not for them, or they're not going to go down this path and looking at this thing or that thing. So I like to ask the question, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I ask you that question for those out there. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? The answer to that question is seldom, I'm already doing it. So then the follow-up question becomes, what does failure look like? What does the failure look like, and what is so bad about it that it keeps you from doing the thing that you really want to do? Because the answer to that question is from the heart. It's linked to your purpose. If you're not doing that thing because you might fail, we have to understand what failure looks like and then do something to mitigate that. And I ask you, what's your answer? Even if you think you're already doing it, is it really what you would have answered 10 or 15 years ago, or is it a watered down version because you think the other thing is not available to you anymore? The reason the other thing is not available to you anymore is because we're on a different path. And I know people talk about quantum physics and 2 realities and 3 realities going on, and you have to change lanes and change vibrations. I don't do any woo-woo. This is not mental health, and I do no woo-woo. Everything is science-based. The only stuff that's in my content is peer-reviewed research on neuroplasticity, and I'm bringing in peer-reviewed research in emotional intelligence. So I do apply it to leadership. So with leadership, I use principles and near principles. And the way I come up with principles and near principles is the research that's so deep and so wide that has had thousands of interviews, many trials, and the research and feedback loops. And there's 4 books that I think are excellent for leaders. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Jim Collins' work, Good to Great and Great by Choice, and Liz Weissman's work, Multipliers. Now, 7 Habits was written in the 1980s. Jim Collins' work was done in the early 2000s. But remember, the brain is 300,000 years old. So these things work just like the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, still applies today. These books are about human psychology, and the brain hasn't really changed that much. But I use those near principles because I'm not going to do that kind of research, that level of research, and it gets us out of a debate. We're going to pick the best practice, a proven best practice. It's research. It's highly researched. It's not been debunked. We're going with that. So peer-reviewed and principles and near principles. I have a question here at the bottom. If you knew you could fund your desired lifestyle, pursuing purpose and passion, what would you be doing? This might be similar to this question up here, but again, we want you to lean into what does your heart say that you want? What is it that you really want to do? And then let's start removing the obstacles that are keeping you from doing it. Now, I mentioned the state mastery. This is the inverted U. It's optimal pressure. In here, between totally disengaged and overwhelmed, we have this optimal pressure zone. Now, if you catch people and just kind of ask them about this, you would find that most people think it's out of their control, that the pressure is coming from the outside and they have no control over it, etc. But I'm telling you that you can change your habits in such a way that you govern your own optimal pressure. You literally stay inside this zone. We'll talk about that today. When people become overwhelmed, they shut down. The neuroplasticity doesn't work well when you're overwhelmed. That's another reason why I said we have to be able to stay calm. And again, think about a dog. If you're trying to train a dog to sit and there's a lot of activity going on, there's other dogs barking and cats are messing with them, it's going to be harder to train that dog in that setting. You have to have some calm. Same thing with our nervous system. We have to be able to manage that optimal pressure. And that's a big part of the 4 pillars of self-mastery, is to stay in that optimal pressure. Outside of the optimal pressure, we end up with unpredictable results. Others' actions change your results. So you can get hijacked by other people just because you're heightened. This is the same thing as being on edge, right? You're on edge, and then little things will set you off. So it's the same thing. When you're outside of that optimal pressure, it's like being on edge. All these things are connected. And then uncertainty causes a lack of confidence. And if you don't have confidence, you're on your heels. And now you're priming yourself with that lack of confidence. The upper limit can be more than just a line. So it acts like a barrier. This is what keeps most people from ever going after what they believe or want to be able to achieve. Yeah, we get the homeostasis. We get the upper and lower limits, and we're just going back and forth in our comfort zone. And we do try to go out of it. Most people try to go out of it. Some people do break through. But when you go in here, what happens is you're now doing something that you believed you never could do, or you're facing the unfamiliar. That creates cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance, by the way, it accompanies neuroplasticity. You can't have a breakthrough without having a break with. And in this barrier are all your memories, conditioned. Remember, memories are conditioned. They're in the network of neurons. The stories, the bad experiences, violence, habit patterns, things you've seen, things that happened to you, maybe getting bullied, getting cheated. Even good experiences could cause you to have some cognitive dissonance as you enter this. The logic being that, or the example being a football player or athlete who only wears his lucky socks on big games. It's become a superstition. It's that he had such a good experience with this, it ends up becoming a limiting belief. And then we have resistance factors, keep you in place, empowerment catalysts, enable breakthrough, cognitive dissonance is neuroplasticity in action. So what we have to do is remove the resistance factors, create empowerment catalysts so that we can go forth and do great things, and then understand that cognitive dissonance is neuroplasticity in action. And along with that, anxiety and excitement have a very similar signature. So we're talking about above the line. And when I have the 4 pillars of self-mastery, living above the line requires that self-mastery. This is what I was alluding to with the state mastery. You do have to take charge of the personal leadership and agency, but it's not difficult. It's a process, and the process is different from what we learned. And that's what makes it hard. And the other thing is I used exit ramps and on ramps because this place in here is so different. It's different than this, and it's different than this. And there's more going on. So we have to have an exit ramp and an on-ramp. Just like if you were traveling down the freeway, you wouldn't go heading east and then 90 degrees head south and you're doing 100 miles an hour. You would have to take an exit ramp and then an on-ramp for the new direction. And so you do slow down and you have to let some things go on the exit ramp. We let some things go so that we can go through here. And then you have to adopt some new habits. And we'll talk about that. We want to go from this to this. This self-mastery takes us into above the line. I call it the allostatic corridor. There's your exit ramp. There's your on-ramp. And then you have the allostatic corridor. Allostasis is a cousin to homeostasis. Homeostasis is stability at the status quo. So you have homeostasis and comfort zone right there. And then allostasis is stability on an upward trajectory. The best example of allostasis is the thru hiker. A thru hiker will start out 90-day hike doing 7, 8, 9 miles a day. By the end of that hike, 3,000 miles later, 90 days later, they're doing 30 miles a day, sometimes 10 days in a row. They don't really look different. They don't look that much more muscular. They haven't lost a lot of weight. What happens is their signal gets stronger. The allostasis is about the neural pathway signal. The same way homeostasis is about the neural pathway signal. Remember, a 300,000-year-old brain, most of that time, 300,000 years, our evolution has been based on hunter-gatherer. You can find there are places on the globe today that people are still hunting and gathering. That's still their MO. And when you consider that of that 300,000 years of evolution, a very small percentage of it has been living the way we are now. So the allostasis, through hiking is applied to physical activity, but it also applies to cognitive processing. That's the big breakthrough, is that neuroplasticity was known to apply to physical activity. Now we know that it applies to cognitive processing as well. The first pillar, fundamentals of cognitive performance. The subconscious is not a mind, but a network of neurons that form paths of least resistance. So a path of least resistance is a habit. I just heard a great metaphor, it's like a forest, that when you're walking through the forest, you take the paths that are already, shown, right? And if people don't walk on there a lot, you end up with, it gets overgrown. Or maybe somebody starts a new path. The tree falls down and somebody starts a new path. There's a new path of least resistance. Instead of climbing over several trees, you have this new path. And if you break the trees, or cut the trees out, that other path will reform. So that's sort of like how the neural pathways are. The path of least resistance is where the habit is. You can change your identity, you can regulate your emotions in real time, and you can eliminate reactivity. 3 different kinds of habits. And again, we can change our habits. We're mostly cells, 50 trillion of them, and 100 billion neurons, as I mentioned. Since we're mostly cells, it makes sense for us to understand the physiology part of this thing. It's a major determinant of your outcomes. Now, in my step 1 of the 7-step reset, there's 5 levers. I call it the fundamentals, which is what I've been covering, that, it's not a mind and that we can change. Those are the fundamentals. You have to have that understanding, or you're not going to be able to get past the next part of it. You're going to have too much cognitive dissonance. The 5 areas are beliefs. Beliefs are stronger than willpower. They're stronger than discipline. So if you're a person who relies on discipline and willpower, which worked well, by the way, in your 20s, most likely, if you're like most people, but in our 20s, we were forming the 20 billion neurons in our prefrontal cortex. 100 billion neurons, 20 billion are in the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex was formed largely from age 19 to 27. So you had an abundance of neurotransmitter, which is why you had more capacity for willpower and discipline. All you had to do was show up and you got better because you had neurons learning as you went. After 30, that doesn't work anymore. You have to do more than just show up if you want to get better. So beliefs are stronger than willpower and discipline. You have to have something stronger than beliefs, and that's going to be recreating the limiting beliefs. When you eliminate the limiting beliefs, your positive beliefs will take you much further than you could ever imagine. Then we have conditioning. From ages 0 to 7, as you know, babies just learn. They just absorb by doing. 0 to 2, they're in the theta state. 3 to 7, they're in the alpha state. They just absorb. It's like being in hypnosis. They just absorb. That's how they learn to read, all that stuff. That's why you look at kids. They have so many similarities of their parents, especially as the kids become adults. They have a lot of mannerisms of their parents. They just pick it up as a child. That conditioning is outdated. As a hunter-gatherer, what those children learned, I wasn't there obviously, what they learned from 0 to 7, you can see that it makes sense, because at 30, they're still hunting and gathering the same way. Our 0 to 7 is so different than what we're living through today. It's not even close. Priming. Priming is starting to become, in my book, one of the most important things we need to pay attention to as we go through the transition. Once you're on the other side, it's not as important because you have the habits to help you, but priming is so powerful. And let me just give you an example. I want to spend a little time on priming today. Let's say that there's something that has a 9/10 probability of happening, a 90% probability of happening. And you know that it has a 90% probability of happening, and so you build your plans around that 90%. There's something else that has a 20% probability of happening. So you give that less weight, you don't think about it. Now, we can also add another dimension in there and call it severity. So now we have probability and severity. Now, let's say that the 90% probability also has a high severity. So call it low, medium, high, and has a high severity impact. On the other hand, you have the 20% probability and it has a low severity. So you have a low probability and a low severity. What priming can do, a person can prime you to focus on that version B, the low probability, low severity, and consume your consciousness with it to where you start making decisions as though that thing is imminent. This is how powerful priming is. It doesn't matter which one is stronger, which one is a better fact, which one is more proven. What matters is which one comes in first. To prevent that from happening, one of the things you can do is prime yourself every morning. Now, I know a lot of people, especially when it comes to business folks and leaders, they're not interested in meditating, and you don't have to do that. But I would say you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your future self to at least take 5 minutes, if not 10, to prime yourself for that day. Now, how do you prime yourself? Start with breathing. Breath work is a powerful tool. Start with breathing. Do 5-second breaths, 5-second inhale, 5-second exhale. Hydrate. And while you're breathing, you're going to relax yourself into a semi-meditative state, meditative adjacent state, and just imagine how your day is going to go. Remind yourself of the things you have to do. Remind yourself of your purpose. Remind yourself of the priorities. And remind yourself that you're capable. The other thing that's happening here is you're removing some of the reactivity. Another thing you're doing is creating an anchor. So if somebody does come in and create some anxiety or create some reactivity, you can anchor back to that moment you had this morning where you were calm, present, and in mindfulness state. So priming can cause anxiety and easily can hijack emotions. And we've all seen it. We've all been there. So pay attention to priming. I'm going to even show you later today how your own habits can prime you and knock you completely off course. The good news is that all things that I'm talking about, you can do something about it. And then we have mindset. That's another thing people think neuroplasticity is mindset. It's not mindset. And mindset, interestingly enough, when you look at it in the context of beliefs, conditioning, and priming, I would say mindset is not as strong as the others. If I had one thing to do with the person, I'd work on beliefs first. If I could do two, it would be priming. Because with the beliefs and priming, I can at least get them showing up as a near best version of themselves. It'll take a long time for the habits to take place, but if I add in neuroplasticity, we can build the habits quickly. And then you have physiology. Physiology is up there because physiology can trigger fight or flight, and physiology can also create calm. You can stand tall and feel courageous. You can slump and feel weak. You can continue to do weak activities physiologically and get weaker and weaker to the point where you're experiencing fight or flight. So here's the step one, fundamentals and levers. Allostatic capacity is the goal, that upward trajectory, stability on an upward trajectory. Fundamentals and levers, beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, physiology, and they're all intertwined. Beliefs impact the other four, neuroplasticity impacts the other four. You notice I did change the word from conditioning to neuroplasticity. Conditioning is what we have. Neuroplasticity is how we reset the conditioning to what's aligned with our quest. Priming is probably one of the more significant ones, especially as you're going through the transition, because it's so easy to get primed into old habit patterns. And then mindset. Without mindset, you're not going to believe that you can do these things anyway. You're not going to put in the effort. Growth mindset. And then you have the physiology. And physiology is a very strong way to get back to coherence. And coherence is important. Coherence is step two. Step two is regulate with rapid recovery. In emotional intelligence, it talks about self-regulation, self-awareness and self-regulation. But it talks about doing it with the conscious mind. What I do at Dynamic Leadership is we move it into the habit pattern. We make rapid modulation, rapid recovery a habit. And in order for that to work, you have to have the coherence. That's what I was alluding to earlier when I was talking about state mastery, why it's so important. So self-awareness, coherence, and then I have in the star, we use heart rate variability as a proxy for coherence. Heart rate variability is the space between your heartbeats. So if you have a heart rate of 60 beats a minute, every beat is not exactly a second from the other beat. It varies. When you're calm, it's a higher variation because it goes up and down with your breathing. But when you're in anxiety, when you're in fight or flight, your heart's racing. It's pushing your heart rate up because it's ready for this fight with the tiger. And then there's no variability or less variability between your heartbeats. So heart rate variability is a good proxy for coherence. And then we have present moment and rapid modulation. These things are all tied into that step two. These 7 steps, the 7 steps of stimulus reaction happen 30,000 times a day on average. For some people, it's going to be more. For other people, it'll be less, but it's about 30,000 times a day. The second pillar, habit mastery. Your habits make up your personality and your identity. 3 types of habits to address. Behavioral habits, those are the easier ones. Things like uhs and ums, idiosyncrasies, scrolling, reaching for your phone. Reactive habits, these are more difficult because you have to know what the trigger is. And if people have a habit of reactivity, then any trigger can create the reactivity. So it's more difficult to identify all of the triggers and do something about them. But what we can, or the cues or stimulus, what we can do is change the reactivity. So that's what we do. So there's 4 layers of reactivity. There's your first layer. This is like the internal threat. We're creating it ourselves. I call it the hater reflex, because in social media, if somebody posts something and you'll have somebody else just like lash out and they're attacking their character. They don't even know the person, but they're attacking their character, etc., because it triggered something inside of them. It was an internal threat. It's a reaction to a reaction. They don't even know the person. So that's the internal threat. That's the first layer. Then the second layer is cognitive biases. Cognitive biases actually come in very early. When I talk about the 2 sides, the network of neurons and the conscious mind, cognitive biases are right up there with reactivity in terms of happening very early. And then you have your reactive habits. Your layer, your ego threat layer. This is like road rage, when somebody's ego is threatened and they lash out. And then the last one would be like a crash out, somebody having a phobia, something like that. We're crashing out. Identity habits are difficult to change because identity and personality, that's a construct. And people try to change their personality or their identity at the construct level. It doesn't work that way. You have to change it at the elements level. These reactivity layers are a good reason why people believe habits can't be changed, because the reactivity, it's happened. By the time you are aware that you're reacting, it's too late. This is the network of neurons side. It processes at 11 million bits per second. This is the conscious mind side. It processes at 50 bits per second. Much, much slower. 11 million bits to 50 bits. And the conscious mind has a reaction time of about a half a second. So from the stimulus to when the conscious mind understands that something changed, it's a half second. Meanwhile, the network of neurons has been processing millions of bits of information in that 500 milliseconds. That's why you feel like you're out of control. That's why you feel like there's nothing you can do about it, because you're so late relative to the 11 million bits or 5 million bits of information that's potentially processed by the time you're aware of it. This depicts it right here. The earlier you can make a change, the greater the impact and the lower the effort. The longer you wait, lower the impact and the higher the effort. This is the first half second. This is the second half second. And then I have a pre-stimulus. The network of neurons is pre-listening. It's always predicting. The brain is always predicting what's going to happen. You go into a meeting and you see certain people and you say, oh, what's going to happen in this meeting today? So-and-so's here. Another time you go in and you see somebody, this is going to be a great meeting. So-and-so's here. You're always predicting what's going to happen, and that colors your experience. This is priming. You're priming yourself with your own predictions. So by doing the priming in the morning, intentional priming, it's very different than letting yourself be primed just by the forces that are out there. And then this here is the space between the network of neurons and the conscious mind. The network of neurons processes in signal. The conscious mind processes in words. So it's important that we have a way to allow that conversion to happen. The network of neurons is converting the signal into something that can be perceived by as thought. So that's this area here. That's this conversion. Now, again, if you're triggered, that 1 second is going to get reduced. You can have a person have 5 or more stimulus reaction cycles inside of a second. If you've seen somebody crashing out or somebody being triggered, you see they're reacting to the reaction. They're not ever even paying attention to the external. You can speak to them, but they're reacting inside. It's like you're in 2 different conversations. Now here's we'll start talking about the habit. I mentioned that our habits can prime ourselves. So this zone here is where your cognitive biases come into play, and this is where your reactive habits, so it's cognitive biases and your reactivity habits live here. Call it readiness. You can make a change there with a perpetual question. A lot of people have a perpetual question that's something like, why can't I do anything right? Now what's going to happen to me? I wonder what fun stuff is going to happen today, being sarcastic. And they're priming themselves for having bad things. And this is not PMA. It's just it's like training your dog, and you go to the cabinet where the dog food is and the dog gets excited. You're priming yourself to believe that something's coming. Then we have the orientation. So these are reactivity habits. This is the orientation zone. This is your identity habits, your personality habits. And then we have mobilization. These would be your behavioral habits. I mentioned earlier that you can have a situation where your behavioral habits are actually causing reactivity. For example, if a person that catastrophizes, they immediately start talking about how bad things are. They talk about what can go wrong, why they're probably going to fail. They are priming themselves, and that is a habitual, right? That can be a habitual pattern, and they're priming themselves. Let me give you an example. A person has self-talk, and they have a little hiccup in the morning, and they say something like, oh, wait, there's the day. The whole day is going to be shot now. They just prime themselves. Where did that statement come from? The whole day is going to be shot. That is a habit pattern. It's something goes wrong. The path of least resistance is to blurt out, there's my day. The whole day is going to be shot. We can change that habit at the behavioral level. That is a behavioral habit that's driving reactivity, and people are trying to change it at the reactivity stage. You change it here. But we'll also talk about how to change the reactivity habits. So that's what I was referring to when I said you can prime yourself. So again, behavioral habits, reactivity habits, identity habits. And then I would say over here in your conscious mind, we call these the response/integration habits. In the 7-step reset, this is all step 3. Step 3 does not include the response. It includes the handoff to the response formation, but it doesn't include the response. The response is step 4. Here's an example of a behavioral habit. I use ums, uhs, and ums. I'm not going to do the whole thing. You can go to 7stepreset.com/live. That's my landing page for this series that I'm doing, and it'll be with the prior clips. 12-minute exercise. You can walk through it, but here's the short version. You stop using filler words, ums, uhs, and likes. And I'm not talking about a person chooses to say I'm talking about the habitual ones that they don't even know that they're doing. You can stop those. 10-minute exercise, they're gone. You won't notice the result until the next day or two. First, you see awareness, and then you start noticing, and you can stop yourself, and then they're eliminated. It takes about a week for them to be completely gone, as long as you practice 2 or 3 minutes a day for 3 or 4 days, because the neuroplasticity happens. Remember, it's not knowledge. The dog doesn't sit because you tell him to sit. The dog sits because you've conditioned that behavior. Same thing with saying ums. And so the first step is you have to know why you do the habit. Why do you do it in the first place? And it's usually tied to safety. Most things you could tie back with the hunter-gatherer, that we do them for safety. Usually the reason why people do it is because as a kid, when they were asked a question in school, they looked up and the teacher said the answer's not on the ceiling. That was kind of embarrassing for them. And they started saying because it holds the teacher at bay while they come up with the answer. And you do come up with the answer because the network of neurons is doing the searching. What people don't realize is that verbalizing that actually slows down the process. It slows down the network of neurons because it's processing noise now instead of just looking for the answers. You're better off having a silent pause. Why do you want to change it? If you don't have a reason to change it, it's going to be harder for you to change that habit. I'd rather see you work on something that you do want to do, because at least you're going to have the stick-to-itiveness. And it doesn't take a lot of stick-to-itiveness. You just have to care enough to let me say it this way. These processes show you the door. They open the door. You still have to walk through. If you don't have enough desire to walk through, then you won't have the change. If it's not because the processes don't work, it's just because it's not important to you at the time. And then we intentionally add a pause. So if you think about what we've done, we first had to come up with why we do it, and that creates some cognitive dissonance. So we teach the silent pause. Intentionally add a pause. You can do a narrative and just intentionally add the pause. Then you leverage the pause. You create emphasis. So now it's not just a pause. We're creating some emphasis. We're creating some emotion for the words that follow. We're thinking about how do we want to convey this emotion. And then we do a new commentary. So these three here, this poor example of deep practice is very shallow. It's not deep practice, it's shallow. But uhs and ums are so simple. That's why I can do it in a 10-minute exercise. And the reason why we do it 3 times, the same reason why you tell a dog to sit multiple times. You tell them to stay multiple times, because you have to reinforce that habit pattern. And then we do a picture swap. So this is like when the person's training the dog and you put the hand up, stay, stay. What you're doing is a picture of you getting ready to say and you swap it out immediately with the picture of your goal, something having to do with that why. Why are you wanting to do it? Again, I'm not giving you the whole thing here, but it'll be on that website that I just showed you, 7stepreset.com/live. Look down underneath the main area, and you'll see the clips from past talks. And then you practice daily. So the first thing that's going to happen, like it takes neuroplasticity a day or two to start taking place, because the neural pathways are literally realigning. My synapses is moving from unused pathways to help the new pathway. And this happens overnight primarily. It happens during the day too, but when you're sleeping, it's much stronger. So the awareness happens first, and then you'll be able to do the redirect, and pretty soon you'll be eliminating. In less than a week, the uhs and ums can be gone. So here's your 7 stages of what I'm depicting here, is to show where this work lives. Neuroplasticity, the reason I have such big claims with it is because we're changing things here, but you're not changing them consciously, you're changing them with habits. You're making new habit patterns, so it happens automatically. This side is too fast to deal with consciously, but you can create habits that are using that same system. This is where emotional intelligence largely lives, in the regulations in the conscious mind side. By the time emotional intelligence is doing regulation, compared to what we're talking about with neuroplasticity, that's like corrective action. So regulation is an umbrella. It starts with prevention, then it has your modulation, which is in the middle, and then it has your regulation. And generally speaking, regulation is cleanup and corrective action. We make this a habit. Now, this one is not a habit. Structural boundaries, you're just creating a boundary. I'm not talking about passive-aggressive boundaries. I'm talking about healthy boundaries. So you have your boundaries. If you're not there, it's not going to happen to you. And then we have your preemptive priming. This is like the changing the perpetual question. This is like priming yourself in the morning. You're preempting a lot of noise and nonsense by priming yourself and then living into that priming. This is why people say, don't pick up your phone, don't do this, don't do that. A lot of these rituals. I'm all about rituals, but I also acknowledge that rituals should be different. It depends on what season you're in. If you're creating and innovating, this is a different kind of ritual. If you're in operational mode, grinding it out, widgets in, widgets out, different set of rituals. If you're in a transformation, going through what we're talking about with the self-mastery, a different set of rituals, because you're going to have to prime yourself more, and you're going to have to do more to keep yourself in a high coherent state. And then we have your dynamic interception. So we train this. This is way beyond the scope of today, but we literally retrain your subconscious, your network of neurons. So instead of being biased towards threat, it's biased towards neutral and positive. And that makes a big difference, because you have fewer threat signals coming across here. Instead of spiraling, because every other thing is a potential threat, you go from 80% potential threat to maybe 10 or 20% potential threat. And then we have dynamic modulation. So the interception is a reset of the trajectory while it's starting. Remember, low effort, high impact. Then we have dynamic modulation. This is catching it as we go. If you drive a car and you've used anti-lock brakes or you've used the traction control, that's like dynamic modulation. It's fixed, it's adjusting on the fly. So if you're in a slide or the car's getting ready to slide, the traction control is, some of them cut the power, some of them add brakes, some of them do both, but it's keeping the tire on that edge of maximum traction so that you don't slide. But if you look at it through a microscope, you'll see the car is doing a lot of micro slides. That's modulation. That's what we're doing over here. We're using modulation, micro rapid recovery, but we're making it a habit. We don't wait for the conscious mind to become aware that something happened. We are proactively setting habits. So the first sign that something is off, it does a rapid recovery. We'll go back to this other slide. So in here, this is the trajectory is being set. We can arrest it in here. Readiness. You won't know consciously what happened, but you'll know that something shifted inside. And when that shift comes in, create a habit. We create a habit in advance. So you immediately take a breath, or in this case, this is very early on. You may have to just focus on something else, quickly shift your attention to something else. Over here, we have an automatic breath, automatic breathing to reset. And consider that this is happening in less than a half second. If you take a 4-second breath and then exhale slowly through your nose, you've already used up 5 or 6 seconds. So that by itself is going to slow you down. So in other words, instead of waiting for you to feel the anxiety and consciously decide to breathe, we make it a habit. And here's some of the breathing. The breath work for modulating, anchoring, and rapid recovery. I use the breathing as an anchor because when you're breathing, if you're doing breath work, you're going to come into, like I said, a meditative adjacent state. And that's like mindfulness. I'm not even talking about fully meditating. You're just calm. You're just sitting there, just focusing on your breathing. I like to do 15-second inhale, 15-second exhale. When something goes off, when something is unexpected, you can immediately just take a breath and get back to that anchored state. Again, it's a habit. It's not a conscious decision. The conscious decision is to build a habit. The habit is the thing that kicks off over and over. This is the physiological sigh. Take 2 quick inhales. This is a good one. And then top it off. So you inhale and then you top it off, and that forces more air into your system. The box breathing, 4 counts, inhale 4 counts, hold 4 counts, exhale 4 counts, hold. That's good for stabilizing, getting back to coherence. The 4-7-8 is very good for getting into coherence. Again, I like the 15-second inhale, 15-second exhale, which is a variation of the 5-second inhale, 5-second exhale. There are entire books written on breath work. So I can't do it justice here, but I'll go through these and you can do some quick screenshots. So this one, the psychological sigh, offloads some carbon dioxide. That extra breath is powerful, and it also breaks your pattern. You think about what I'm talking about here. You've heard of you have to first interrupt the pattern. We are building a habit that interrupts the pattern. You take that double breath, you've interrupted the pattern. And we have the box breathing. I think that one is one of the more common ones. This one is more about getting alert. It's more about focused. So a lot of times people like to, when they're teaching meditation classes, they have people do box breathing just to settle in. But it's good for mindfulness as well. Then we have the 4-7-8. This is the one I said is very good for coherence because it targets the vagus nerve, helps them with that vagal tone, and coherence is so important. And this is how you get back to that quick, rapid recovery. And then we have intentionally slow your speech. If you're talking to somebody, just slow down. Just slow down as you're talking. If you're by yourself, you can verbalize and slow down what you're saying. You're just stringing out. So you're not reacting to reactions. You're stringing out. Again, making these habits. And then the last one, the physical tension and release. You could be in a meeting and you can simply just grab your knees and squeeze your knee. And again, we're using habits to break habitual patterns. And you're not consciously thinking about squeezing your knee. You're building these anchors in advance. So it does take a little bit of work, and I'm not suggesting that you do all of them. You pick one. I like the 15-second inhale, 15-second exhale. You might like the quick breaths. The holding or squeezing for tension might be something that works for you. If you're a kinesthetic person, just squeezing and then releasing could be useful. Now, the third pillar, state mastery, personal leadership, agency, and expansion. Accessing the best version of yourself requires being in a high performance state. Cell behavior is like human behavior. There's two configurations for cells. Either they're going after nutrients or they're in protective mode. If they're in protective mode, they're not going after nutrients. You can see the correlation between why people get sick if they walk around holding a lot of resentment. But for us, if we're stressed, we're in fight or flight, we're not able to pursue growth. We get that cognitive narrowing. People who've been in combat and experienced firefights, they know this. We call it the red mist. You get that cognitive narrowing. This is the fight or flight. You're ready to fight this tiger. Life is fractal. So what's true for cells is usually and oftentimes true for the self. Your internal environment is the external environment of cells. Our external environment is the internal environment of our organizations. We want to make sure the organizations are non-toxic. We want to make sure the organizations are healthy for the people who are in them so that we don't create this anxiety and fight or flight. You can't perform at your best if you're stressed. And hence that's why I brought up the pressure curve earlier. To put a picture with it, I used the 5 levels of personal leadership. In the middle is stabilize. This is where people, generally speaking, are attempting to stay. But if you're trying to stay and stabilize, you're often going to drop down into destabilized. Above stabilized, we have agency, and above that, we have expansion. I suggest staying in agency, working to stay in agency, because this is you're pushing on the coherence. So this gets back to what I was talking about earlier. One foot in front of the other. You just keep pushing, keep pursuing back to that agency. You don't let yourself fall into stabilized and destabilized. Every day you get up, it's like a new day. You're working towards that agency. Expansion is like when you level up. If you think about athletes raising the level of the game, you don't stay in expansion for long periods of time. But you can go there for a few hours at a time, get some momentum, and this is that allostatic living. Destabilize and collapse, we don't want to be spending time there. And these can all be traced back to habits. You can build a habit of being an agency. You can build a habit of when you're instabilized, you move back to agency. We can build those habits. When I talk about doing things with neuroplasticity, it's because neuroplasticity is the protocol to achieve the path of least resistance. And here's the 7 steps. You see we have step 1 is your fundamentals and levers, understanding them. Believes neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, physiology, and allostatic capacity. So you're doing laps around this. This is happening 30,000 times a day on average. So this is not something small. We have to constantly be aware of where are we, what beliefs are we giving life to? What are we doing with respect to priming? Am I still focusing on the habits that I want to build? Just as like a quick a dashboard. It's like a quick KPI and a dashboard. And then step 2 is telling you, am I in a strong coherent state? I use HRV, heart rate variability, daily. I just see where I am. If my heart rate variability is low, I know I may need to do some more work just to stay at even keel. I may have to take more breaks and maybe hydrate more, maybe do some deep breathing multiple times a day. The more coherence you have, the less chaos you're going to be experiencing and the less rigidity. Chaos at the extreme is like crashing out. Rigidity is like a severe fixed mindset. So we want to have high coherence so we have low chaos, low rigidity. I look at these as the dashboard because most people are just going along and whatever happens, happens. You don't realize that you are unconsciously engaging in stimulus reaction cycles constantly during the day. If we're awake 65,000 seconds and you're having 30,000 stimulus reaction cycles, that's a recycle every other second. It makes sense for you to get back to coherence and not spend a lot of time off in some other land. Then step 3, we spoke about most of today. This is your stimulus, reaction, and handoff to response. It's not the response, but it's the handoff to the response side. And the response is step 4. So I call this the 1 second model. It's probably a little bit less than 1 second because the reaction time is a half second and you can respond quicker. But if you agree that there should be a pause, now you see why we talk about it separately. Because once you have the suggested handoff from the network of neurons to the conscious mind side, you have to decide, is that the response you're going to have? And if you're in an operational environment where every day is pretty much the same as yesterday, it probably works to have the response the same as your reaction. But if you're in transformation world, everything is new. Every day is new. It's a new frontier. You can't be relying on past reactions. Those aren't going to work. Step 4 is response. And then I have step 5 is an intervention if needed. So the step 4 is your response, but it's also a check-in. Am I emotionally agitated? If I'm emotionally agitated, I need to modulate my emotions before I act. Step 6 is the action step. Do it, delay it, delegate it, discard it. But again, we want to modulate our emotions so we're back to even keel before we take action. We don't want to be taking action in a hijacked state. And then we have step 7. This is mindfulness. Step 7 is mindfulness. And what we want is to return to mindfulness so we're ready for that next 7 steps as we go through. So the 7-step reset is just resetting your conditioned patterns. So your conditioned patterns are aligned with your quest instead of being something that was done for you and to you by your environment when you were age 0 to 7. Allostatic neuroplasticity. The same way athletes drill until the right move is automatic under pressure, we drill with cognitive processing so that the habit patterns are automatic. That's where we get the rapid recovery. Leaders and professionals can rewire the first half second so that when pressure hits, you're going to show up with your best version of yourself. You want your best response to fire first. So you want to have your best priming in place. You want to be coherent. You want to modulate your emotions if you get a little bit anxious. You don't want the old defaults kicking in. And the way you prevent them from kicking in is not by suppressing them. It's from having new paths of least resistance, which you decide intentionally based on your quest. We don't need to add new skills. We need to install stability. Once you install the stability, your energy, momentum, effort that you put in is going to take you further. Or I should say farther. And then we have your making the reset a habit. Step 1, step 2, then 3, 4, 5, 6 is just, whatever. That's life. You're just dealing with life. 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 is thrown at you or created by you. Then 4, 5, and 6. 3, 4, 5, 6. But you come back to return to mindfulness. 7, 1, 2. That's your job with agency. 7, 1, 2. 7, 1, 2. If you make this a habit, 7, 1, 2, you're going to be living more days in agency than you would otherwise. And the 4th pillar. This is the one I added because too many people get so far and then they lose their ability. They get thrown off course. They get hijacked. They get emotionally triggered. Starting with nutrition, you can limit your oxidative waste. Oxidative waste creates inflammation. If you look up medical content, it'll tell you that your body maintains your blood at a specific pH, something like 7.35. Don't quote me on that, but it's a balance between alkaline and acidity. And if you look up alkaline diet, it will say it reduces your acidity. But then the medical industry says that alkaline diet doesn't help with the balance. Well, that's true and not true. Because the body's going to get to that 7.35 no matter what, you can have a high alkaline diet or a high acidic diet, you're still going to be at 7.35. What's in the gap is that the acidic diet or the toxic diet is going to create more oxidative waste. Oxidative waste creates more inflammation, and that's going to cause more toxins that the body has to process. So it becomes this exponential event. And then the body has to do things like creating cholesterol to protect the arteries from the toxins, etc. So while alkaline diet is not going to change the pH of your blood, an alkaline diet will result in less oxidative waste. With exercise, lymphatic fluid. The lymphatic fluid doesn't have a pump, so you have to be moving for it to move, and the lymphatic fluid is how you cleanse the blood. Same with hydration, oxygen. You breathe deep to cleanse your blood. So we want to have clean blood. Hydration. Speaking of blood, the brain gets its nutrients and oxygen from the blood. If you're dehydrated, that blood is thick, and thick blood travels slowly, starving the brain for oxygen and nutrients. That throws the brain into fight or flight. And now you have fight or flight, and it's not even from some external stimulus. It's just because you're not drinking enough water. You can do a little experiment. Try it for yourself. When you wake up tomorrow, instead of going for the coffee right away, just right off the bat, drink a half a liter of water at least, preferably a liter. You can put the bottle right next to your bedside and immediately just drink as much of that liter as you can right away. You'll notice your brain fog lifts. The brain fog lifts because you're thinning your blood, and it thins that quickly, and now it's getting nutrients to the brain. So just do that experiment yourself. Give yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I like to hydrate while I'm doing my breathing. Give yourself 5 or 10 minutes, and you'll notice that you don't feel like you need the coffee. Drink the coffee anyway if you want, but you'll find this is just an experiment to show you how quickly the brain improves its cognitive function just from drinking water. So yeah, hydration is good for physiological. It's also very good for cognitive processing. Now here's the big one, forgiveness. Close doors to random triggers. And I talk about the little T. I used the example already of the ice cream cone getting knocked out of someone's hand. But if you consider most of our issues that cause anxiety have to do with other people, relationships are very important. On an earlier slide, I had up the 7 performance areas: mental, physical, spiritual, emotional was in the middle, and then relationship, professional, and financial. The first 3, mental, physical, spiritual, are in our control. The last ones, emotional, is in the middle. Relationships, professional, financial, involve other people, and relationships is the first one that involves other people. And since that little T, if we have any of that, it's probably involved other people. Interactions with other people can send us back into that little T, or that anxiety, or that stress. So we have to reconcile that early on. These are 100% in our control, and nobody would disagree with that. By the way, spiritual is not the spiritual realm, it's your higher self. Now, people may have abdicated the responsibility, but you can control these. You can also control emotional, but this one takes a little bit of work when you're starting a transformation, because people can easily emotionally hijack you. We have these buttons, and the people around you know what buttons to push. It's even entertainment for some people. You see the YouTubers doing things, they know they're out there pushing people's buttons for likes. I don't agree with that, but it just shows you how easily it is to hijack somebody. Road rage, that's under this emotional. And if you don't get a handle on the emotional in the part that we can control, you're kind of cooked when it comes to interacting with other people. So we run laps around these areas to get very good at it using the step 1, making sure that we're doing step 1 and 2 well, so that we're doing this well and we're staying in control. Then we're going to be better at managing our relationships. And then the exercise. So this gets back to the lymphatic fluid. But when you do all-out intervals, think about sprinting. And I like sprinting, but it also requires a lot of recovery, and it's easy to get hurt. So just be aware of that. But you can do footwork drills. You can do bounding exercises. You can do hiking. You're not going to have the 7 to 15 second intervals with that, but you can do bursts. Hiking is actually a very good all-around exercise. But the reason why 7 to 15 seconds is it's all-out effort for 7 to 15 seconds. It improves the mitochondria, improves testosterone for men, estrogen for women after menopause. It reduces inflammation. It improves your brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. It improves AMPK, your metabolic, your use of energy, how you access energy from your metabolism, and even your proprioception, where you place your limbs, because you're forcing the body to create more neurotransmitter when you're doing this, strengthening the signal. When I use the example of the through hiker, I said they don't look different after a 90-day hike, yet they're doing 30 miles a day, sometimes 10 days in a row. It's that the signal is stronger, and that's what this all-out intervals, this is what they do. They strengthen your signal. And to take it a step further, the 7 factors of allostatic increase: it's intention, novelty, precision, balance or complexity, progression, intensity or explosiveness, and then struggle at the edge of ability. This is just like video games. If you think about it, all these 7 are right there in video games, and there's a reason why people play video games for hours and hours on end. But when you apply all of these in whatever activities you're doing, whatever you're doing exercise, if you can apply 7 of these ideally, but at least 6, you're going to be generating more neurotransmitter, and that's going to be helping you with the allostasis, getting into that allostatic state. And here's your performance hygiene. There's 8 steps. So you can do a screenshot. There's your step 1, identify and isolate. Step 2 is access the anchor. Step immediately into a meditative adjacent or high coherent state using rapid mindfulness techniques. And then you want to deconstruct what was going on. What is the reason for it? Deconstruct it, because it's like leaning into it and getting some distance between you and the emotion so that you can process this. It also helps to have the emotional modulation. Don't suppress it. Use emotional modulation to locate it in the body. Locate it. Where is it? It's in my chest. It's in my gut, whatever. Label it. You can go back to the emotional modulation. One of the 8 uncomfortable emotions. Is it disappointment, helplessness, embarrassment, vulnerability, sadness, shame, or anger or frustration? Once you label it, you're able to get a handle on it. And then we have the next 4. Extract the lesson. What am I supposed to learn from it? So locate, label, learn. That's part of the emotional modulation as well. Reframe the perspective. Consider the pressures, wounds, or context of the other person. Hurt people. So it may not have had anything to do with you at all. Just like I was talking about the hater reflex. These people lash out at folks on social media. They don't even know who they are, but it's because it triggered some hurt in themselves. So understand that they may have something going on. Now, when I talk about forgiveness, again, it's not morality, it's performance hygiene. And I'm not suggesting you expose yourself to more hurt. Just because you forgive the person doesn't mean you're going to see them again, doesn't mean you have to go, hug and all that stuff. You may choose to always have the boundary that you're not interacting with that person anymore. That's fine. I'm just saying, don't walk around with the resentment. There's too many people who are ill because they've carried the resentment for so many years of their life. And then shift through their eyes. This is real powerful. You can even do this on a small scale if you're having a disagreement with somebody. Imagine yourself walking around and looking at yourself over their shoulder. You'd be surprised at what you see. Sometimes you're so animated, you're so angry, you're acting out, and you recognize, wow, I'm the one who's causing a big part of that. No wonder they were agitated. Look at my expression. It's really interesting. Sometimes I had people do that, and you see them jerk when they first see their surprises them how much negative energy they were putting into that interaction. And then you release them. You can say, hey, am I willing to be able to give this person a hug? Can I release it enough? Now, here's what I have found. When people are going through this process, it's often that neuroplasticity has to take place. They may have to do a few iterations. They might make a chip at it the first time, but the second day, I always just forget about it. The next day, do it again. Another chip. I also say start with some of the smaller ones. Get used to the forgiveness process. Make that a habit. But you may have to do 2 or 3 iterations because there's so much anger and so much resentment that it takes a while for the neuroplasticity to take place. Remember, I said it activates at night. So the 7-step reset, learn to apply it real time, interception, modulation, and rapid recovery. That's what it's all about. I use models and frameworks to simplify the work because the conscious mind communicates in words and the network of neurons communicates or processes on signal. Then we have identify high impact resistance factors, activate new habits with neuroplasticity, and create a roadmap for execution. That's what I do in the 7-step reset. We can take everything I talked about today and personalize it. We do a personalized 7-step reset where we do this with you based on your quest. Now, if you don't have some quest or purpose, I would suggest wait until you have that because we're going to build a blueprint towards it. And you don't want to just do hypotheticals. We want to really build a real blueprint. And then we're going to also build a on-ramp for that blueprint. And that's what you walk away with. You walk away with a plan, a 7-step reset experience. You'll have access to models, frameworks, and architectures because I have a library. That library has well over 90 videos and blogs and articles in it. So you'll have access to that. And I'll pinpoint specific ones depending on what comes up in our session. But the first part 1 is a blueprint, 60 to 90 minutes, design your outcome, explore and deepen your why, create an actionable blueprint, and then you have access to the library, I said. If you feel like this is not for you, just say so and you'll get your money back, $99, you'll get it back. I don't want to keep your money if it's not going to work for you. But if it does, then we do the on-ramp. Of course, you lose the access to the library, but you'll keep the blueprint. And then the next time we meet, preferably within a day or more, and then within a week, we'll do the on-ramp. We'll build the on-ramp so you can start working yourself out of that homeostasis, out of that zone, and start your trajectory. The rest of it is DIY. That's what the self-mastery is. You'll have access to the library for 90 days. That'll help you with the DIY. Or you can do a full coaching session, and that will come out of this. So that is it. You can visit 7stepreset.com/reset to get that special price. 2 sessions, 60 to 90 minutes each. We personalize your own 7-step reset, work on your own reactivity habits, identity habits, and behavioral habits. We're not going to fix them all at that time, but we'll take care of the major ones so you can start on your journey. All right. So I'll do this again next week at 10 o'clock. And I'm going to expand it to more emotional intelligence and neuroplasticity, to combine those two. And then the third pillar would be self-mastery. So we're using the best practices of emotional intelligence, which is peer-reviewed. We're using neuroplasticity, which is peer-reviewed, to turn that into habit patterns. And then we use self-mastery to step into that future life that you have in mind.